Welcome everyone to our webinar on privacy. My name is Lacy Ellenwood, and I'm a library consultant with the Mississippi Library Commission. Privacy is a core value of librarianship, yet it can feel overwhelming to tackle privacy concerns in our libraries while also informing our patrons. The information presented in this webinar comes from the Illinois Library Association and the privacy field guides provided by the American Library Association, a project that was made possible in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So how and why are we talking about privacy? Finding ways to talk about the importance of privacy and why libraries should care is a critical way to make needed changes that can lead to safer environments for patrons, staff, and the community. It is helpful to have talking points when discussing the need to evaluate privacy concerns with library patrons and administration. Privacy is essential to the exercise of free speech. It is also a human right. The library community recognizes that children and youth have the same rights to privacy as adults. Lack of privacy discourages individual choice about what to read or view, thereby suppressing access to ideas and how we learn in the world. Libraries are the cornerstone of democracy and help ensure Americans are able to read, research, and think freely without the possibility of being surveilled. This undermines our democratic society. In most states, including Mississippi, we have statutes declaring library records as confidential documents. In Mississippi, that code section is 39.3.365. It states that records maintained by any library funded in whole or in part by public funds, which contain information related to the identity of a library user relative to the user's use of books or other materials at the library, shall be confidential. Such records may only be released with the express permission of the respective library user or as a result of a court order. Privacy is an equity issue, and individuals should have the ability to give consent to be surveilled or not. So how can we create private spaces? Our spaces can hinder or enhance privacy. While we might be locked into our aging buildings, a lot can be done with furniture to make the library more inviting and give the max amount of privacy possible to our users. You can use furniture to create more privacy in the library by setting up chairs so that the book cover of a reader would face the wall or could be hidden from people that may be walking down an aisle. And you can try arranging desks so that computer screens are not facing out towards public spaces. Some additional tips: purchase privacy screens for all computer terminals and provide laptops for more private browsing. You can have headphones available to provide more privacy as well, and I would encourage you to create signage to let users know that those are available. Some non-tech privacy concerns include user surveillance. Many libraries have cameras to ensure the safety of both users and staff. There should be a notice provided to patrons before entering the library regarding the use of cameras. While safety is of the utmost importance, it can also lead to privacy concerns. Cameras placed inside the library might be able to follow a user throughout the building, tracking their use and borrowing history. This footage could be viewed by library staff or requested by law enforcement. If your library does not have cameras, you may still be violating the privacy of users by monitoring their behavior inside the library. Sometimes staff can have conscious or unconscious bias that lead them to follow patrons through the library. Do not follow users around the library or peek at what is on their computer screens. Take a look at where your security cameras are pointed. Can they follow someone around the library, keeping tabs on what they access? If possible, have security cameras only outside the library. We all discuss patrons with fellow staff. Many times, staff just want to share an interesting interaction or express frustrations after a long day. When discussing patrons, it is important to take pause to decide if it's necessary to divulge who they are to another staff member. Staff should never discuss one patron's behavior with another patron. If you live in a small town, you might not even need to share someone's name for another person to figure out who you're talking about. Be vague with details that might expose someone without their consent. Always consider where you are before speaking. While it might seem at a first glance that it is only you and a coworker at the circulation desk, another user may be within earshot. When it comes to overdue items, libraries will often delete the borrowing record of items returned. An overdue book may remain on your record for years, though. It is another opportunity for a patron's borrowing history to be shared without their consent. Does your library call users to inform them of overdue items? Develop procedures that require a patron to verify their personally identifiable information before staff disclose the title of an item. No information should be given to anyone other than the card holder. Some examples of personally identifiable information include name, social security number, birth date, government issue ID number, or contact information such as an email, phone number, or mailing address. Libraries are palaces of paper, holding vast quantities of information, including personal identifiable information in binders, desk drawers, and file cabinets. They turn up years of volunteer forms, library card applications, program sign-in logs, scratch paper with barcodes, and search queries. Paper is still one of the most common ways that users' privacy can be violated and information shared without consent. Follow the record retention schedule set by the Mississippi Department of Archives and History for public libraries, which will limit the amount of information kept by any library system. You can see a recent YouTube webinar hosted by the Library Commission on records retention for public libraries. Information collected should only be for business operations. No information should be collected because you think it might be needed one day. This is especially true for personal identifiable information. When people hand over their data, they trust us to keep it safe. Any document that contains a patron's personal identifiable information needs to be secured in a place where only authorized staff can access it. When possible, store information in a space secured with a lock until it needs to be accessed. Your library system, again, should follow the guidelines set by the Mississippi Department of Archives and History for records retention. Everything has a lifespan, and it's important to regularly discard documents. Anything containing the patron's personal identifiable information must be shredded. I'd advise hosting a shredding party as part of an in-service date with library staff, as this is one way to tackle this task regularly. The number one way that libraries violate patron privacy is through on-the-shelf holds. There are many libraries that use full names and library card numbers to identify holds. Sometimes that library card number is a piece of sensitive data like a social security number. This is far from the best practice since it allows users to see what others are reading and exposes patron personal identifiable information. I would advise anonymizing holds. Does your hold slip include a full name and library card numbers? If so, then talk with your library administration about alternatives. Don't have control over changing the hold slips? Well, what else could you do to anonymize the process? Some libraries use opaque bags or paper slips that can go over books when they sit on a hold shelf. Many patrons still appreciate getting a physical receipt after checkout. They hang them on the fridge to remember due dates, and often they are left behind inside a book for the next user to discover. In the good old days, we could easily see who had previously checked out a book, but all that changed with our use of integrated library systems, or ILS. Our ILS receipts can still divulge patron information. So look at what information is on your checkout receipts. If it contains information that may expose a library user's personal identifiable information, then try and get it changed. This may require calling vendors to update the process. Tip: library card applications contain the most personally identifiable information. I would advise reviewing what you are currently collecting and determining what could be removed. Privacy policies tell users what data is collected about them, their data rights, how the data is used, stored, shared, and deleted. Well-written privacy policies give users clarity on how the library and its vendors handle personal information. Privacy policies are notorious for being intentionally written to obfuscate rather than inform. They are written by lawyers to protect companies from litigation, not as a mechanism to aid in the understanding of the end user or to gain informed consent for the use of information. Let us be better. By learning to read privacy policies, you can start identifying when vendors have a privacy policy that aligns with your library's values and ethics. Reading privacy policies published by corporations will teach you how to provide clarity in your own policies. So let's go through some phrases and terms so that we can better understand what might be discussed with privacy policies. Personal identifiable information versus non-personal information. Personal identifiable information, or PII, is information that can be used to identify a specific person. We've previously mentioned the examples of a social security number, financial account numbers, and contact information like email, phone, and address. Non-personal information will often include what operating system is being used, user analytics, device ID, and IP address. Information we collect versus information you give us. In order to use a service, we often have to give over at least one piece of personal information. When someone signs up for a library card, the information they give us may include name, address, and phone number, but they are aware that this information was collected as they were part of the transaction. When an organization uses the phrase information we collect, they often are talking about information they gather without the user giving it to them. This may include the person's IP address, what operating system they are using, browser history, websites visited, search history, etc. Users are often unaware this information is being collected, and its collection is usually a condition of use. In a privacy policy, this information most often falls under the non-personal information. Cookies allow a website to recognize the user each time they return. They are small text files placed on the user's computer that collect personal data. Cookies can capture user settings, email addresses, and other personalization settings. Session or temporary cookies are only active while the user is browsing a site and are deleted when the browser is closed. Permanent or persistent cookies remain active even after the browser is closed. They may store a username or password and other personalization settings. Persistent cookies can be used to track a user's interaction with a website. Third party is a vague term used in most privacy policies. A third-party entity might be used for data analytics. Since library user data is protected to some degree in most states, including Mississippi, it is important to ask vendors what information is shared and with whom the information is shared, including third parties. You might have confidence in the data security of your vendor, but do you have the same confidence in a third party? That's something to think about. Some additional common phrases and terms. Affiliated business. Many businesses have direct financial ties to other businesses. Two companies are considered affiliated when one is a minority shareholder of another. Privacy policies may state that user data is shared with affiliated businesses. This is not usually considered selling user data, even though your library user information may be shared with an outside entity you did not contract with. Ask vendors to disclose what information is being shared and with whom. Combined data or data broker. Whenever you go online, data is collected about us. Data brokers combine this data to create user profiles. Profiles are sold to other companies that allow them to send targeted marketing. If a vendor uses trackers or certain cookies, it's important to find out if that information is being compiled and shared with data brokers. Opt-in or opt-out. ALA's privacy and interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights states that patrons should have the choice to opt in to any data collection that is not essential to library operations and the opportunity to opt out at any future time. We want users to have the choice when it comes to what data is collected and how it is used. If you see a vendor's privacy policy has the default set to opt out, meaning the user has to manually choose to exclude themselves, then ask the vendor if it can be changed to reflect the library's commitment to privacy. Consent or explicit/informed consent. Consent is a tricky concept online. Many websites say they get a user's informed consent. However, that is often just by ticking a box when registering for an account. A user is generally considered to have given consent just by using the website. Most often, users have given their consent to a wide range of tracking just by opening a website. Let's get into some red flag warnings. Selling and sharing information. Any vendor should be able to explain the life cycle of a user's data. If you see a policy that mentions sharing data with fourth parties, ask for specifics. Any mention of selling user data should be a huge red flag. Libraries already pay to access a vendor's platform. Therefore, vendors should not be making money off library user data as well. Storing and tracking location data. Libraries and vendors should always strive to collect the least amount of data required to offer a service. Using GPS coordinates to target the exact location of a user can mean that person may be easily identifiable. Third-party integrations for user authentication. Many people like the convenience of using their Facebook, Google, or Microsoft account to log into various services across the web. I know I do. Sometimes these user authentication portals have embedded third-party trackers that give the platform access to a wide range of personally identifiable information. Clear GIFs, web beacons, and tracking pixels. These are transparent images embedded on websites and in emails. They are mostly used in conjunction with cookies and track user behavior across the web. They can be used in emails to notify the sender when the recipient has opened a message. Web beacons cannot be denied or blocked like cookies. Some more warnings include email communication when people begin to receive marketing emails. The ideal setup for a user to access a vendor's product through the library would be where they do not need to share their email to create an account. Their library card number and PIN should be sufficient. When this is unavoidable, it is important that the vendor use the email address sparingly and not push advertising messages to the user. Disclosure of information. Vendors may get requests from law enforcement to disclose user data. This is part of the reason we want vendors to collect the least amount of information possible. If we don't collect it, then we can't provide it. It is reasonable to see a notice in a privacy policy that states that a user's information may be shared with law enforcement, but the vendor's ability to release the user's information should be limited in scope. Seek to add contractual language that requires a vendor to notify the library when a request for disclosure is made, and to only release users' information when compelled by law. Ownership of data. Details around ownership of data can usually be found in the vendor contract. What you're looking for in a privacy policy is language that describes what happens to the data if a company is bought, sold, or transferred. A library should not be forced to share its user data with a new company until they have had the opportunity to enter into a new contract. Security. There is no 100% guarantee that user data can be secure when a privacy policy uses soft language like may, try, might, or actually calls out their inability to secure data. That is a huge red flag. This is used to absolve a company of legal responsibility should a breach occur. Look for privacy policies that tell you how they secure their data, not that they are unlikely able to secure it. Libraries should have a privacy policy available for patrons to know how their data is used. It can be part of the new user packet patrons receive when they first obtain a card. It should also be in an easy to understand language. No techie speak. Don't have a privacy policy? Well, there's really no need to reinvent the wheel. The Library Freedom Institute has created a template for any library to use when crafting their policy. Consider what sections resonate with your library practices and what language is useful for your local policy. Each library's privacy policy will depend on their vendors, ILS system, print management systems, etc. All policies should be reviewed and approved by the governing authority for a library system and reviewed by legal counsel. Let's talk about some digital security basics. While this information may be common knowledge for us librarians, it can be helpful for our patrons to know so they have a better understanding of how to protect themselves while in the library. Creating a strong password is like having a unique key and lock for your house. Do you lock your house when you leave for the day? People typically answer yes to that question. And that's because we don't want anybody else to have access to our personal items. So remember, strong passwords equals strong locks. But remembering passwords for 100 different accounts can be a challenge. One way our patrons can remember is by using passphrases. Think of a set of words that have meaning to you and that you'll remember. Do not include any personal information such as birth dates, addresses, or names. String together a combination of these words to create a random phrase. Then add numbers and symbols to the phrase at the beginning, middle, or end. Tip: forget replacing your I's with the number 1 or the word for with the number 4. These are common and easily cracked by hackers. Believe it or not, one of the most common ways hackers gain access to accounts is through the human responsible for keeping their accounts safe. One solution to too many passwords is using a password manager. Password managers generate and store complex passwords for you. You just have to remember one master password that is very secure and unique. But watch out, saving your password within your browser is easily hackable. Multi-factor authentication. For accounts that hold a lot of personal information, we want to make sure we are the only ones with access. Multi-factor authentication means entering a password into a digital account. You are then asked to verify your identity through another means. Most often, this will be a texted code to a phone number on file. That code is then entered to gain access. If you ever see one of these texts come to you when you are not trying to access the account, then you know someone is attempting to break in. And this would be a good time to change your password. Most libraries have filtering software for their email accounts and follow the rules of the E-Rate program, but this doesn't mean that we shouldn't be on the lookout for malicious emails. Only click links in emails from trusted sources. Don't download an attachment unless you know who it is from. Don't enter your personal information into any form you have reason not to trust. Use context clues and listen to your gut. Just because an email looks like it's from a coworker doesn't guarantee that it is. A hacker can send a message that appears to be from your boss or coworker by hacking or spoofing their email address. Look at the entire URL you are being asked to click on. Is it exactly the same as the site address you normally type? Tip here, if you happen to click a link that you think might be malicious, immediately contact your IT staff. Malware is software that is designed to do damage or other unwanted action to your computer or smartphone. Usually, this type of software is installed on your computer when you download attachments in emails or click on unknown links or ads. It can also be installed when someone puts an external flash drive into your machine. If you open an email and don't know what the attachment is, do not download it. Check patron and staff computers for antivirus software. Keep mobile devices updated to the latest version of the operating system. Your library can create procedures that would not allow staff to put patron external flash drives into staff computers for additional safety. Ransomware is a type of malware that is gaining in popularity. This is when hackers will hold your information hostage. Attackers may lock all your files or shut down your network and require you to pay them to regain access. If files are important to you, then make sure to back them up to an external drive or a cloud server. Ransomware often focuses on government and business, so watch your work email. Again, if it feels wrong, then report it to your IT department or to the Mississippi Library Commission help desk. Have a plan in place for a ransom attack. Consider, does your library have a method to check out materials without access to your ILS? Network privacy. When you go to your library's website, do you see a little lock in the address bar? Does your web address say HTTP or HTTPS? The S stands for secure, and it means all communications between your browser and the website are encrypted so no one can see the data that is being sent. It is important that your library website is using HTTPS. If your site is secure, visit a few library vendors to see if their sites are secure. Now that you have some knowledge, think about sharing it with your coworkers and patrons. Conduct a short staff development session with topics from this training and those from the public library project sponsored by the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Okay, now what? Well, let's talk about some actionable steps. Conduct a privacy or confidentiality audit. Librarians should first review their everyday operations to make themselves aware of the many types of records that link patron identifiers with information requests. Some examples include circulation records, overdue material records, interlibrary loan requests, email messages sent and received on public terminals, copies of messages generated through email or chat reference services, as well as sign-up sheets for computer use. Think about gathering the minimum amount of patron information needed for library operations. If the library needs to collect data about patrons for planning purposes, librarians should find a way to do so that protects the anonymity of patrons. Retain information connecting a user to a particular transaction only as long as needed for normal operations, and then discard it. Restrict access to patron information to a limited number of appropriate personnel. You can educate staff on confidentiality policies and include educating library board members, town officials, and any others that you may need support from. Make a flyer or a poster that states patrons' rights to privacy, possibly including the text from the applicable state law. Rather than using sign-up sheets, or otherwise creating records of people who use library computers use what's called a pass system, which is when a patron shows an ID to a librarian, but the ID is not recorded. Avoid practices and procedures that place patron information on public view. ALA advises librarians to avoid using postcards to notify patrons of overdue or requested materials. They should avoid giving the titles of reserve requests or interlibrary loan materials over the phone to members of the library user's household or leaving such information on answering machines. And to be sure to position staff terminals carefully so that the screens cannot be read by members of the public. Encourage your library consortia to also adopt privacy policies. Otherwise, you cannot guarantee the privacy rights of your patrons. Don't include patron names on interlibrary loan requests sent to other institutions. When requests are submitted to lending libraries, user information is often unknowingly shared with people outside the borrowing institution. If the lending institution does not require the patron's name, the requesting library should not provide it. Find ways to separate patron names from interlibrary loan records. Set automated circulation systems to purge borrower information when items are returned. Delete old web server logs. Web log files store information about all the times web pages are accessed and may include information such as dates, times, URLs accessed, IP addresses, or names of persons accessing pages. And finally, delete cookie files or set browsers to reject cookies. I hope you've learned some ways to protect the privacy of your patrons and yourself. I want to thank you for watching our webinar and for supporting your local public library. Have a great day.